The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension, the quiet murmurs of people waiting for the next case to be called. It was just another day at the courthouse, or so it seemed. A young black woman in a tailored suit sat calmly at the judge's bench, flipping through a case file. She had worked tirelessly to earn her position, breaking barriers, proving herself over and over again. But none of that mattered to the officer standing near the door, sipping his coffee, bored and patient. Officer Carter was known for his short temper, his lack of patience, and, though few dared to say it out loud, his bias. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on the woman at the front. He didn't recognize her, didn't see the authority she carried. To him, she was just another face, another person he could dismiss. When she glanced up and caught his eye, something in her calm, unwavering gaze irritated him. Without thinking, he took a step forward, his coffee still steaming in his hand. The courtroom fell silent as a gasp rippled through the crowd. A moment later, the sound of hot liquid splashing against fabric filled the air. A sharp inhale of breath. The officer stood frozen, his hand still outstretched, as the woman slowly rose from her seat. The coffee dripped from her robe, the heat of it burning through her clothes, but she didn't flinch. She wiped her hands, her expression unreadable. The room, the people, even the officer himself, everyone held their breath. And then, in a voice that sent a chill through the room, she finally spoke. "Officer Carter, do you know who I am?" The silence was suffocating. Carter shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, his grip tightening on the empty cup. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He had no idea. Meanwhile, in another part of town, a different kind of moment was unfolding. A packed city bus rattled down the street, passengers crammed together, tired faces staring at their phones, lost in their own worlds. Among them, 17-year-old Jamal sat near the front, headphones in, staring out the window. He had a lot on his mind: college applications, his part-time job, the weight of expectations. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her, a woman, visibly pregnant, struggling to stand as the bus swayed. No one moved. No one even looked up. Without hesitation, Jamal pulled out his earbuds and stood. "Ma'am, you can take my seat," he said, offering a small smile. The woman blinked in surprise, her eyes flicking around as if expecting someone else to have spoken. When she realized he was talking to her, she hesitated before nodding gratefully. "Thank you," she said, sinking into the seat with a relieved sigh. Jamal gave a quick nod, gripping a handrail as the bus lurched forward. A few passengers watched the exchange, but quickly went back to their own business. To him, it was nothing, a small act of kindness, the way he was raised. But as he stood there, he didn't notice the woman reaching into her bag, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out a folded piece of paper. A few minutes later, just as the bus approached to stop, she gently tapped his arm. He turned, and she held out the note. "For you," she said softly. Confused, Jamal took it, stuffing it into his pocket without much thought. "Thanks," he said before stepping off the bus. It wasn't until later that night, when he was emptying his pockets, that he remembered. He unfolded the paper, expecting a simple thank you. Instead, he found something that made his breath catch in his throat. His hands trembled as he read the words over again, his heart pounding. Because what was written on that note was about to change his life forever. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, his fingers gripping the note tightly. His eyes scanned the words again and again, his mind racing. He had expected a simple thank you, or maybe a kind message, but what was written on that piece of paper was something else entirely. His stomach tightened, and his hands felt clammy. He swallowed hard, his heart thudding in his chest. His mother called from the kitchen, the sound of clattering dishes filling the small apartment. "Jamal, dinner's almost ready." "Yeah, I'll be there in a minute," he called back, his voice uneven. His eyes dropped to the note again. The handwriting was neat, careful, as if the woman had taken her time writing it. But the words carried weight. They weren't just a thank you. They were a message. A warning. A secret. Jamal inhaled sharply and shoved the note into his pocket. He needed to think. He needed to understand. But something told him that whatever this was, it wasn't just a coincidence. And deep down, he knew his life was never going to be the same after this. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, the tension hung thick in the air. Officer Carter felt his pulse hammering against his temples. The entire courtroom had gone silent, waiting, watching. The woman in front of him, her clothes still damp with coffee, stood tall, her gaze locked onto his. There was something in her expression, something powerful, something unshakable. Carter cleared his throat, shifting from one foot to the other. He glanced around as if looking for backup, but none of his fellow officers made a move. The people in the room weren't on his side. Not this time. The woman took a slow step forward, and Carter felt a strange chill crawl down his spine. "My name," she said evenly, her voice calm but firm, "is Judge Melanie Carter." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Carter's mouth went dry. His mind scrambled to make sense of it. Judge? This woman? He had just thrown coffee on a judge. A black judge. In open court. Melanie didn't break eye contact. She let the silence drag on, let him feel the weight of what he had done. Then, in a voice that carried through the room like a wave, she spoke again. "Officer Carter, I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." Carter's mind raced. He knew he had messed up badly. His usual arrogance faltered under her unwavering gaze. He had assumed. He had judged. And now, standing before her, he realized just how wrong he had been. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Jamal pushed his plate around, his mind somewhere else. His mother noticed. "You okay, baby?" "Yeah," he mumbled, forcing a bite of food into his mouth. She gave him a look. "Something on your mind?" Jamal hesitated. Should he tell her about the note? Would she understand? Would she freak out? He wasn't even sure if he understood it himself. "Nah, just school stuff," he said instead, forcing a small smile. His mother didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. "All right," she said. "Just remember, whatever it is, you can talk to me." Jamal nodded, but in his heart, he knew this wasn't something he could just talk about. Not yet. Later that night, when the house was quiet, he pulled the note out again. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. He traced the words with his fingers, his mind spinning with possibilities. Why had the woman given this to him? What did it mean? And more importantly, what was he supposed to do now? In the courthouse, Judge Melanie Carter stood in her chambers, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The coffee stain had dried, but the moment still played in her mind. She had spent her entire life fighting for her place in this system. She had worked twice as hard, endured twice as much, just to be taken seriously. And in an instant, one careless, biased action had reminded her of the battle she was still fighting. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was her clerk, a concerned look on her face. "Judge Carter, are you all right?" Melanie turned, nodding. "I'm fine." The clerk hesitated. "Do you want to press charges?" Melanie exhaled slowly. She had the power to make this right, to hold Officer Carter accountable. But something in her told her this needed to be handled differently. The courtroom wasn't just a place for punishment. It was a place for justice. For change. And she intended to make sure that change happened. Jamal lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The note sat on his nightstand. The words burned into his memory. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear: his life was no longer just his own. Somehow, he had been pulled into something bigger than himself. And there was no turning back now. Jamal walked home from school with his hoodie pulled up, his hands buried in his pockets. His mind was racing. He and Malik had spent the whole day trying to figure out what the no meant, but they were no closer to any real answers. All they had was a mystery and a growing sense of unease. The city felt different today. The streets, usually filled with background noise, honking cars, chatter from people walking by, felt sharper, more tense. Every time Jamal turned a corner, he had this weird feeling, like someone was watching him. He kept glancing over his shoulder, but there was nothing. Just his imagination, probably. But then, as he reached the corner near his apartment building, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. A black car, parked across the street. The windows were tinted, too dark to see inside, but the way it was sitting there, engines still running, sent a chill through him. He tried to shake it off and kept walking, but just as he reached his building's entrance, he stole one last glance over his shoulder. The car hadn't moved, but he swore he saw the shadow of someone shifting inside. His heart pounded as he hurried inside, locking the door behind him. Meanwhile, Judge Melanie Carter sat at her desk, staring at the papers in front of her without really seeing them. Officer Carter's words from earlier kept replaying in her head. There are things going on, things I shouldn't be talking about. She had spent years dealing with cases of corruption, exposing people who thought they were untouchable. But something about this felt different. This wasn't just about a cop who lost his temper in a courtroom. This was bigger. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Judge Carter. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then, a voice, low, measured. You should drop this. Melanie's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? That's not important, the voice continued. What's important is that you walk away. Don't push this any further. A slow chill spread through her. She had received threats before, but this one felt different. It wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It was calm, calculated. The kind of warning that came from someone who wasn't making empty threats. She took a breath, forcing her voice to stay steady. If you think I scare easy, you picked the wrong person. A pause. Then a quiet chuckle. Suit yourself. But don't say you weren't warned. The line went dead. Melanie sat there for a long moment, the dial tone ringing in her ear. Then, slowly, she placed the phone down. If there was any doubt before, there wasn't now. This wasn't just about her. This was bigger. And she needed to figure out just how deep it went before it was too late. Jamal sat at the kitchen table, staring at the note again, like the words might change if he looked at them long enough. His mom was washing dishes, humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. He needed to talk to Malik. He needed to do something. But before he could even pull out his phone, there was a knock at the door. A heavy, deliberate knock. Jamal froze. His mom turned, wiping her hands on a towel. Who could that be this late? She walked toward the door, but something in Jamal's gut screamed at him. Wait, he started, but it was too late. She unlocked it and pulled it open. Two men stood in the doorway, dressed in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. Good evening, ma'am, one of them said, voice smooth and polite. We're looking for Jamal. His mom frowned. Who are you? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We just have a few questions for him. It won't take long. Jamal's heart pounded. He didn't know who they were, but every part of him was screaming that they weren't here to ask anything. His mom glanced back at him, confusion in her eyes. Jamal, do you know these men? Jamal stood slowly, his mind racing. He knew one thing for sure. This was about the note. And whatever was happening, whatever he had gotten himself into, it was far from over. Jamal's throat went dry. His heart pounded so hard he thought the two men at the door might hear it. He forced himself to stay calm, even as every instinct screamed for him to run. His mom's eyes darted between him and the men. She stepped protectively in front of him, her voice sharp. Who are you? And what do you want with my son? The taller man in the suit smiled again, but it was empty, practiced. We just need to have a quick word with him. Won't take more than a few minutes. Jamal knew better. These weren't just random people with questions. He didn't know exactly who they were, but one thing was clear, this was about the note. He swallowed hard and forced his voice to stay steady. I don't know anything. The shorter man's expression flickered, just for a second, like he wasn't expecting that answer. His partner quickly recovered, his fake smile still in place. We think you do. Jamal's mom stepped forward. If you have questions, you can ask them right here. My son's not going anywhere. For a moment, the two men stood there, the tension thick. Then, as if making a silent decision, the taller one nodded. Of course, ma'am. We'll be in touch. And just like that, they turned and walked away. Jamal's mom slammed the door shut, locking it twice before turning to him, her face a mix of confusion and anger. Jamal, what was that? Who are they? Jamal hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, but he wasn't even sure what everything was. I don't know, he lied. Maybe it's a mistake. His mom studied him, her eyes searching his face. She knew when he was holding something back. But finally, she let out a slow breath. If they come back, we're calling the police. Jamal nodded, but deep down, he knew that wouldn't help. Because whoever these men were, they weren't the kind of people the police would go after. Across town, Judge Melanie Carter sat in her car outside a quiet cafe, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. She was supposed to meet someone here, someone who had called her just an hour ago, promising information. But they were late. She glanced around, checking the street. It was empty, except for a few parked cars and a single flickering streetlight. Something about it felt off. She was about to start the engine and leave when she spotted a figure hurrying toward her. A man, mid-40s, disheveled, looking over his shoulder like he was being followed. He reached her car and knocked on the window. Melanie rolled it down just enough to hear him. You have information for me? The man nodded quickly, glancing around. I don't have much time. They're watching me. Melanie's stomach tightened. Who's watching? The man swallowed hard. The same people who threatened you. They're bigger than you think, Judge Carter. It's not just about one bad cop or one mistake in a courtroom. This goes deeper. Melanie studied him carefully. How deep? The man exhaled sharply, glancing over his shoulder again. Let's just say, if you keep pushing, you won't just be fighting a cop. You'll be fighting an entire system. Before Melanie could respond, the man stiffened, his eyes widening in fear. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, fast, disappearing into the night like he was never there. Melanie sat frozen for a moment, the weight of his words settling over her. Whatever she had stepped into was bigger than she had realized. And now, she wasn't sure if she could stop it. Back in Jamal's room, he sat on his bed, staring at the note again. His phone buzzed. It was Malik. Yo. Malik's voice came through urgent. We got a problem. Jamal tensed. What happened? I found out who that woman on the bus was. Jamal sat up straighter. Who? Malik hesitated. She's missing. A cold chill ran down Jamal's spine. What do you mean, missing? She didn't show up to work today. Nobody's seen her since yesterday. And bro, Malik's voice dropped lower. She was a lawyer. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. He had assumed she was just some random woman. But if she was a lawyer, and now she was missing, then whatever was happening was much bigger than he thought. He gripped the note tighter. The woman had given it to him for a reason. She had trusted him with it. And now, whoever was behind this wanted it back. The knock at the door earlier hadn't been a warning. It had been a message. And Jamal had just realized he was in way over his head. Jamal's hands trembled as he held the note, his mind racing. Everything felt like it was moving too fast, too many unanswered questions, too many dangerous signs pointing to something much bigger than him. A missing lawyer, 2 men in suits at his door, and now this sick feeling in his gut that he was being watched. He had to figure out what was going on before it was too late. He grabbed his phone and called Malik back. We need to meet up. Now. Malik didn't even hesitate. Same spot. Yeah, Jamal said, already pulling on his hoodie. And, be careful. 20 minutes later, they met at the basketball court near their school. It was late, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty court. Malik was already there, pacing. This ain't normal, man, Malik said as soon as Jamal walked up. I did some more digging. That lawyer, her name was Vanessa Blake. She worked on cases involving police corruption. Jamal's stomach twisted. And now she's missing? Yeah, Malik nodded. And get this. She was investigating something big before she disappeared. Something about judges and cops working together to cover up cases. Jamal felt a cold realization settle over him. You think that note has something to do with it? Malik pulled out his phone, showing a picture of an article he had found. Look at this. Jamal squinted at the screen. It was an old news article about a corruption case that had been dismissed years ago. The name of the judge handling the case stood out like a flashing sign. Judge Melanie Carter. Jamal's breath caught. Wait, she's the one that cop threw coffee at. Yeah, Malik said. And now she's suddenly involved in this mess? That's not a coincidence, bro. Jamal's head spun. If Judge Carter had been involved in a corruption case before, was she part of this too? Or was she trying to stop it? Before they could process it any further, headlights swept over the court. A black car pulled up across the street. Jamal and Malik froze. The doors opened and two figures stepped out. Jamal's heart pounded. It was the same two men from earlier. But then, a third person stepped out of the car. Judge Carter. She walked toward them with a determined look, her heels clicking against the pavement. Jamal, she said firmly. I need that note. Jamal's pulse raced. How do you know about it? She glanced at the men behind her before lowering her voice. Because Vanessa Blake was my friend. And if she gave you something before she disappeared, that means she trusted you. But you need to trust me now. Jamal's grip tightened on the note. He looked at Malik, who was just as tense. How do we know we can trust you? Malik asked. Judge Carter hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Jamal. It was another note. The handwriting matched the one Vanessa had given him. If anything happens to me, find Judge Carter. She's the only one who can stop this. Jamal's breath caught. Vanessa had planned for this. Judge Carter's voice was urgent. I don't have time to explain everything right now, but if you don't give me that note, they will keep coming after you. She nodded toward the two men, who stood silently, watching. They work for someone much more powerful than a cop losing his temper in court. Jamal looked at Malik. Malik nodded. Slowly, Jamal handed her the note. Judge Carter unfolded it, reading the message. Whatever it said, it made her face go pale. She exhaled sharply. This is it. This is the proof we need. Before Jamal could ask what it meant, one of the suited men stepped forward. Judge, we have to go. She turned back to Jamal. You did the right thing, Jamal. But you need to be careful. Things might get worse before they get better. Jamal swallowed hard. What's going to happen now? Judge Carter gave him a knowing look. I'm going to finish what Vanessa started. With that, she turned and walked back to the car, the two men following close behind. The car pulled away, disappearing into the night. Jamal and Malik stood there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Then Malik let out a shaky breath. Bro, what did we just get ourselves into? Jamal didn't know the full answer yet. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Jamal and Malik stood in silence, the air thick with everything that had just happened. The black car had vanished into the night, taking Judge Carter and the note with it. The weight of it all pressed down on Jamal's chest. He had thought he was just giving up his seat for a pregnant woman. He never imagined it would turn into something so big, so dangerous. Malik shook his head. Man, I don't even know what to say. Jamal exhaled slowly. Me neither. They walked out of the basketball court, their usual spot now feeling different. The world had shifted under their feet. By the time Jamal got home, his mom was asleep. He crept into his room and locked the door behind him. For the first time in hours, he let himself breathe. He sat on his bed, staring at his phone, half expecting another unknown number to call, another warning. But there was nothing. Just silence. Days passed, and Jamal tried to go back to normal life, but it wasn't easy. He kept looking over his shoulder, wondering if the men in suits would show up again. Wondering if Judge Carter had really managed to do something with that note, or if she had just put herself in more danger. Then, one afternoon, he was sitting at lunch with Malik when his phone buzzed. A news alert. His eyes widened as he read the headline. Major corruption scandal exposed. Judge and officers under investigation. He quickly tapped on the article, his heart pounding. The report detailed a huge scandal involving multiple police officers, judges, and powerful figures who had been covering up wrongful arrests and cases for years. The case had been reopened due to new evidence that had been handed over by none other than Judge Melanie Carter. Jamal's breath caught. She had done it. Malik, noticing Jamal's reaction, leaned over. What is it? Jamal turned the phone toward him. Malik's jaw dropped. Yo, that's her. They read through the article together. The report didn't mention Vanessa Blake by name, but it was clear that her work had been what led to this moment. And now, thanks to that note, the one she had trusted Jamal with, the truth had finally come out. Malik shook his head, still in shock. Bruh, you were this close to some serious stuff. Jamal let out a breath. I know. A strange mix of relief and sadness settled over him. He was glad the truth was out. But at what cost? Vanessa Blake was still missing. Judge Carter had put herself in danger. And the people behind this, they weren't going to go down quietly. But at least it was a start. The next few days were filled with news updates, arrests, and public outrage. The city was buzzing with the fallout. Jamal kept expecting to hear from Judge Carter, but she never called. He figured she had done what she needed to do and moved on. Then, one evening, as he was leaving school, his phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number. You did good, Jamal. She would have been proud. Jamal stared at the screen, his heart skipping a beat. He didn't know who had sent it. Maybe Judge Carter. Maybe someone else. But the meaning was clear. Vanessa Blake might not be here to see it, but what she had started wasn't in vain. Jamal took a deep breath and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Maybe he wasn't a hero. Maybe he hadn't done much. But he had done something. And sometimes that was enough. The courtroom remained frozen in shock. Officer Reynolds stood stiff, his grip tightening around the empty coffee cup as his mind raced. His face drained of color. The woman he had just assaulted wasn't just any courtroom visitor. She was Judge Melanie Carter, one of the most respected judges in the district. The weight of what he had done settled in his chest like a brick, but there was no undoing it now. Judge Carter took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. She wiped the remaining coffee from her cheek, the burn leaving a faint red mark on her skin. She didn't lash out, didn't demand his immediate arrest. She didn't have to. The room itself did the talking. Every eye was on Reynolds, their silent judgment louder than any outburst. Before anyone could react further, the doors creaked open again, and all heads turned. A young black teen hesitantly stepped forward, his hands gripping a folded piece of paper. He was nervous, unsure why the air in the courtroom felt so heavy, but he was here for a reason. Judge Carter shifted her gaze to the boy, softening just a bit. Come forward, she said, her voice steady despite the moment of chaos before. The teen took a deep breath and approached the bench. His name was Jamal. Just the day before, he had done something simple, something that felt natural to him, but in a world often divided by differences, it stood out. He had given up his bus seat to a pregnant white woman who had been struggling to stand. She had thanked him with a warm smile, but before she got off the bus, she had pressed a note into his hand and whispered, "Read it when you get home." And now here he was. Judge Carter reached out as Jamal handed her the note. She unfolded the paper carefully and read the words written in neat, careful handwriting. Dear young man, I don't know if you realize what you did today, but I want you to know it meant more than just a kind gesture. My husband was raised to believe people like you were dangerous, but today I saw proof that kindness has no color. When I told him about you, it made him think. It made him question. And sometimes, change starts with just a small moment. Thank you for being that moment. Silence filled the courtroom as Judge Carter took in the words. Jamal looked at her anxiously, unsure of what she would say. She set the note down gently on her desk and looked at him with something warm in her eyes. Kindness, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. It can break down walls we never thought possible. Jamal swallowed and nodded. He hadn't thought much about what he had done. It had just felt right. But now, standing here, he realized that even small actions had power. The tension in the room shifted. What had started as a moment of injustice, an officer blinded by his own prejudices, was now contrasted by a simple act of humanity. Judge Carter finally turned her gaze back to Reynolds, who stood motionless, awaiting his fate. She didn't yell. She didn't rage. Instead, she spoke in the same even, powerful tone she always did. Officer Reynolds, she said, you let anger, assumptions, and hate cloud your judgment. And today, you've made a mistake that can't be ignored. Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. "I could hold you in contempt," Judge Carter continued. "I could have you arrested immediately. But I won't." The room tensed. Some people looked surprised, others disappointed. But Judge Carter wasn't done. Because real justice isn't just about punishment. It's about correction. It's about change. She leaned forward, locking eyes with the man who had disrespected her without even knowing who she was. "You'll be held accountable. You will answer for what you've done. But more importantly, you will be required to learn from it." Reynolds exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath. He started, but his voice cracked. The weight of it all, the embarrassment, the realization, the consequences, was too much. Judge Carter straightened. "You will undergo sensitivity training. You will work within the community you so often judge from a distance. And you will stand before this court again, not as a man of power, but as a man willing to change. If you fail, make no mistake, you will no longer wear that badge." The officer nodded stiffly, his jaw tight. It wasn't the immediate punishment some had expected, but in many ways it was worse. Because it meant facing the very people he had spent years looking down on. Jamal watched everything unfold, the notes still pressed in his hands. He realized now that change didn't always happen in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it started with something as small as a seat on a bus. Sometimes it was in a note passed from one hand to another. And sometimes it was in a judge's firm but steady words, forcing someone to see the world differently. As the court dismissed for the day, people left with something to think about. Officer Reynolds, shaken but silent, walked away knowing his life would never be the same. Jamal, clutching the note, stepped out into the bright afternoon, feeling lighter than before. And Judge Carter, the faint sting of coffee still lingering on her skin, sat back in her chair, knowing she had done what she always aimed to do, deliver justice, not just by law, but by truth. Because at the end of the day, justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure people walked away better than they were before. And sometimes, all it took was one moment to start the change.